Meet Arnita Champion. At 61, she's often mistaken for someone in her mid-30s, and not because of filters, lighting, or clever angles, but because her body and energy simply don't follow the pattern most people accept as normal. What makes this even more striking is how quietly it happens. Most people don't notice when aging begins. They only notice when it becomes visible, when the mirror starts to reflect something different, or when the body begins to resist things that once felt effortless. And by that point, it already feels like the process is irreversible. But then you look at Arnita, and that belief starts to fall apart. Not because of lighting, not because of filters, and not because she's hiding behind expensive procedures. What's unsettling is how natural it looks. No exaggeration, no obvious tricks, just a body and a face that don't seem to follow the usual timeline. So the real question isn't how she looks younger. It's why most people don't. Because Arnita didn't rely on anything extreme. She didn't overhaul her life overnight or chase complicated routines. Instead, she built something much quieter and much more consistent. And it starts with something almost too simple to take seriously. She spends a lot of time outside, not occasionally, not when it's convenient, but as a regular part of her daily rhythm. At first, it sounds basic, almost insignificant, but when you look closer, it becomes clear why this matters. Sunlight regulates more than just vitamin D. It affects your internal clock, your hormone balance, even your mood. Fresh air changes the way you breathe, how your blood carries oxygen, how your brain processes fatigue. And over time, that changes how your entire system functions. Arnita doesn't treat walking as exercise. She treats it as maintenance. She moves through parks, quiet streets, places where the air feels different. There's no rush, no pressure to perform, just steady movement and presence. And this is where something subtle happens. Her body stays in motion without ever feeling forced, which leads to the next layer of her routine. She trains, but not in the way most people imagine. There's no dependency on gyms, no complicated equipment, no waiting for motivation to show up. Her workouts happen at home, because the biggest barrier for most people isn't knowledge, it's friction. The effort it takes to get started, the resistance to leaving the house, preparing, committing. Arnita removes that barrier completely. Her training is simple but deliberate. Squats, planks, controlled movements using her own body weight. Nothing flashy, nothing excessive. But there's consistency. And consistency, over time, reshapes the body far more reliably than intensity. She builds capability. Each movement supports posture, balance, and strength in a way that translates into daily life. It's not about looking strong, it's about moving like your body still belongs to you. And then there's one element in her routine that almost sounds out of place: a mini trampoline. At first, it feels unexpected, even unnecessary. But there's a reason it stayed in her routine for years. The motion of jumping creates a unique kind of stimulation, something between movement and light impact. It activates circulation, encourages fluid movement through the body, and gently challenges coordination without stressing the joints. It's not about intensity, it's about rhythm. That repeated up and down motion trains the body to adapt, stabilize, and respond. And in a way, it keeps the system awake. Which brings us to something even more fundamental: nutrition. But again, not in the way most people approach it. Arnita doesn't follow strict diets. She doesn't eliminate entire food groups or obsess over every calorie. Instead, she focuses on clarity. Her meals are built around foods that don't need explanation. Fresh vegetables, clean protein sources, healthy fats. Foods that the body recognizes and processes without resistance. She avoids what drains her system: excess sugar, heavily processed foods, anything that creates spikes followed by crashes. And over time, this creates stability. Energy doesn't rise and fall unpredictably. The body doesn't have to constantly compensate. It simply functions. What's interesting is how all these elements connect. Time outside supports her energy. Simple training maintains her strength. Movement throughout the day keeps her system active. And nutrition provides the fuel without overload. Individually, none of these seem revolutionary, but together, they form something much more powerful. A system that works with the body instead of against it. And this is where her story starts to shift from unusual to meaningful. Because Arnita didn't discover a shortcut. She removed the friction between her habits and her biology. And when that friction disappears, the body stops struggling. It starts responding, adapting, maintaining itself in a way that feels almost effortless from the outside. Which leads to a deeper question. What if aging isn't just about time passing, but about how much resistance your body faces along the way? And if that's true, how much of it is actually within your control? There's a moment in life when people start trying to fight aging. And then there are people like Arnita Champion who quietly stop fighting and start understanding it. That shift changes everything. Because once she built the foundation, movement, simple training, time outdoors, she didn't stop there. She went deeper. But into precision, into what she was actually giving her body every single day. Arnita has a very grounded belief. What you eat doesn't just affect how you feel today, it literally becomes part of you. Your skin, your energy, your recovery. It all starts there. But instead of chasing trends or strict diets, she simplified the process. She removed what didn't belong. Over time, her kitchen changed. Processed foods disappeared. Sugar stopped being a daily habit. Ingredients she couldn't recognize stopped making their way into her meals. What replaced them wasn't exotic. Fresh vegetables, whole foods, clean protein, simple combinations that the body doesn't have to struggle to process. And here's the interesting part. She didn't do this out of restriction. She did it to create clarity. Because when your body isn't constantly dealing with overload, energy stabilizes, skin responds, digestion becomes predictable instead of reactive. And that stability carries into everything else. But Arnita understood something even more subtle. Health isn't just physical, it's neurological. Most people don't think about this, but the brain ages too, and one of the fastest ways to accelerate that process is repetition without variation. Doing the same thing, every day, the same routes, the same meals, the same patterns. It feels safe, but over time, it dulls the system. Arnita deliberately avoids that trap. She changes small things constantly. A new walking route, a different type of meal, a new activity she's never tried before. Not because she's chasing excitement, but because novelty keeps the brain active. When you introduce something unfamiliar, your brain has to adapt. It forms new connections. It becomes alert again. And with that comes something people often associate with youth. Curiosity, energy, a sense that life is still expanding, not narrowing. For her, this isn't occasional. It's built into the way she lives. And then, there's something even more foundational than all of this. Something that quietly shapes everything else. Her mindset. Arnita doesn't live without problems. That's not the point. What's different is how she processes them. She doesn't let stress become a constant background noise. Because over time, that kind of stress does more than affect your mood. It changes your body. Hormones shift. Recovery slows. The system stays in a subtle state of tension. Instead, she trains her attention. She looks for what's working. Small moments, simple things, a good conversation, a quiet walk, even something as ordinary as a cup of coffee, not as a forced exercise, but as a habit of perception. And gradually, that rewires the way her mind reacts to the world. Less tension, more balance, more space to recover, not just physically, but mentally. And this is where her philosophy becomes unexpectedly powerful. Because after everything, training, nutrition, movement, mindset, there's one more piece that holds it all together. Acceptance. Not resignation, not giving up, but clarity. Arnita doesn't spend her time comparing herself to who she was 20 years ago. She doesn't measure her value against unrealistic standards or chase an impossible version of youth. She works with what she has now, and that frees up something most people don't realize they're losing: energy. The energy wasted on frustration, comparison, self-criticism. When that disappears, it can be redirected into movement, into health, into presence, and suddenly, the entire system becomes lighter, more sustainable, more real. When you step back and look at her life as a whole, you start to see a pattern. Nothing she does is extreme, but everything she does is aligned. Her nutrition supports her energy, her habits support her mind, her mindset supports her recovery. And together, they create something that looks almost unusual from the outside, but feels natural from the inside. Which leads to a different way of thinking about aging. Maybe it's not something you stop. Maybe it's something you influence, slowly, consistently, through the way you live every day. Arnita's story isn't about staying 20 forever. It's about removing the things that accelerate decline and replacing them with things that quietly support life. And when you do that long enough, the result doesn't look like effort. It looks like ease. So here's the question that stays with you after everything you've seen. If your current habits stayed exactly the same, what version of you would they create 10 years from now?